Good afternoon. This is Rebecca Martin from the National Association of System Heads, Taking Student Success to Scale. We are really excited today to bring you another in our webinars on predictive analytics, this one focusing on actionable analytics. What can you do with those data once you've got them? How can you use them to move your agenda forward? And we've got, I'm trying to do too many things at once here. So we've got three really exciting panelists for you to hear from today. Rebecca Karoff from the University of Texas System, Mitchell Colver from Utah State University, and David Troutman also from the University of Texas System. They each have some important perspectives to share with you, and we know that you will have lots of questions. So when you when you have a question, we suggest please use the chat function. We will try to monitor them and answer them along the way, but we will also have several times when we will be stopping and asking for questions. So get your questions out there and we'll do our very best to answer them. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Rebecca Karoff.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here. And when Rebecca says we have some experts around data analytics, it's not me, but it is happily our co-presenters, Mitchell and David. But I think we all sort of know that analytics is a hot topic. It's all the rage. And I think it is all the rage in ways that are mostly good productive, but also there's some cautions and challenges around the way everyone is having the needing to use data differently. It is a generative and exciting time. Data analytics is opening up new avenues and strategies for impacting student success. But as I said, it's a time of enormous pressure for colleges and universities, for state systems and state agencies to perform analytics well and to perform them right in a sensitive, thoughtful way, and to get data into the hands of people who can use it. Lots of data governance and privacy issues. We have questions around data literacy and data leadership. And as we all work to make data actionable in terms of its descriptive, predictive power and potential, there remain significant questions around capacity, resources, people, infrastructure, platforms that we need to wrestle with. I also just want to recognize that many of you participating in the webinar today are also doing some extraordinary cutting edge and in the trenches analytic work. We know that they're taking place at your institutions and your systems. So we are assuming a sort of beyond baseline, probably intermediate understanding, even advanced for some of you, understanding of the data analytics world. But today, as Rebecca said, we get to hear from two remarkable experts with vision and passion for data and analytics who can provide a picture of student-centered and capacity-building operations. One is at the institutional level, Dr. Mitchell Colver, manager and senior data analyst in the Center for Student Analytics at Utah State University. And the other, my colleague David Troutman, operates in a system environment. He's Associate Vice Chancellor for Institutional Research and Advanced Analytics. David and Mitchell are going to work to sort of monitor the chat box as they go through their slides, anticipating some particular questions. Some of those can probably get answered along the way. We will also have time for questions and discussion in the last part of the webinar, and hope to engage with some of the bigger questions at the heart of this analytic endeavor. So let me turn to Mitchell to start with the example of a single institution and ask you broadly, Mitchell, how is Utah State making data actionable, expanding data literacy among institutional stakeholders, and deploying analytics to better understand student behaviors, to design interventions, and to allocate resources? And in particular, how are you using analytics to understand equity gaps and how to close them?
Yeah, thanks so much, Rebecca. I really appreciate those questions, and I'm excited to be here with the group today presenting. As we move to the next slide here, I want to kind of introduce the institution, start by introducing Utah State University and telling you a little bit about our goals and mission. Utah State University was founded in 1888 as Utah's land-grant institution under the Morrill Act. And we've grown to have 34 different sites and locations all around the state of Utah where we provide education to what you call the common individual, right? Our land-grant mission is geared towards an access mission, bringing education to, especially to the rural individuals in the state of Utah. So 3 of our campuses are residential. Logan, Price, and Blanding are residential campuses. And the other sites, the other 34 sites, range in size from large centers that have multiple classrooms and faculty offices to single-room delivery locations. We broadcast over 350 courses each week. As part of that, we have a lot of online programs, and this is a picture of our administration building. This is in the month of May. This is really how green and lush the Mountain Valley here is in northern Utah. And we're an ag school. Our mascot's the Aggies, and so we take this access, rural access to higher education very seriously. And moving on to the next slide, 3 years ago, I was hired on to kind of head the analytics initiative here at Utah State. And as part of that, we sprinted towards the creation of the Center for Student Analytics a year ago. So the center itself is just a year old, but the work has been underway for more than 3 years. And we developed this mission because we had done a tour of different institutions around the country and noticed that many of the institutions we were interacting with had kind of a technophile approach to analytics, where analytics for its own sake or analytics because it was sleek and neat. We tried to take an approach that put the professional and student success as the main reasons for doing analytics. And so you can see our mission statement here says the Center for Student Analytics empowers the professional. Oh, and it looks like I've lost this slide there, so I was going to read it to you.
I'm sorry.
Rebecca, are you able to?
That was my internet connection. What slide are you on?
The mission statement of the center. So it says empowers the professional to pursue, using data, to pursue student success. And then it goes on to say that there's 3 core elements of our process that we really feel are very important. And when the slide comes back up, you'll see those 3 elements. But the first one is this idea of optimizing the institution. Analytics really help us to identify areas where there could be room for growth, where maybe things haven't gone as well as they should, or maybe there's opportunities to pivot programs or services slightly to get a better return on our investment. While we're optimizing, it's really important and critical to not let the data drive, but to make those data-informed decisions, and to do so through the second element, which is this collaboration across the institution, where people's own expertise as professionals is being synthesized with the data insights or the analytic insights, and also with higher education research, to really come to the best conclusion for the institution. And then all of that geared towards greater intentionality, which is that third element, is intentionality, this idea that in our work, we want data not to be the end, but the means through which professionals fully actualize and fully realize themselves as intentional leaders of institutional programs and services. When it comes to intentionality as a goal, analytics are really a very necessary or crucial element of intentionality. If you're not able to measure in a precise or thoughtful way the things that are happening at an institution, it's very difficult to claim that you've been intentional in the way that you've designed your curriculum, your programs, your services, your co-curriculars and extracurriculars. And so for the purpose of intentionality, analytics seems to be at the heart. We articulate this mission in this way to try to pivot away from the belief that somehow we should be this kind of data-driven notion, right? We much prefer the data-informed kind of language, and that's kind of how we pursue that kind of professionalism. So at the core of our work is professionalism. Well, has that paid off? How has that gone in terms of producing the kind of results that you might expect or hope for? I want to walk you through some of the initiatives, and so we actually can move to the next slide here. This is, nope, sorry, go back one, Rebecca, sorry about that. What's displayed on the screen here is the results of advising analytics initiative. We saw the opportunity to use collaboration and advising analytics to optimize the services that were being provided by academic advisors. And so in this work, we looked at kind of what would you think of as a baseline. So over 3 years, an average, 2015, 2016, 2017, what kind of gains in persistence were we seeing? What kind of student counts were we seeing? And how was that manifesting in tuition as we were increasing our persistence levels? So you could see these kind of, on average, it was about 35 students a year and, a couple $100,000. In 2018, we released advising analytics that allowed advisors to, using a risk identification model, to identify students who might be experiencing some kind of academic, financial, personal, social, domestic vulnerability that was leaving them in distress, and that these analytics predictive models were kind of picking up on and identifying the students and saying, okay, here's a student that probably may need some support from an academic advisor. Now, as we reached out and had those conversations with those students, working off of those analytics triggers, we saw this huge increase in our persistence, right? So it was a 2.34% increase in the persistence rate that year. The count was 369, which is 10 times greater than the previous 3-year average. And obviously this tuition increase is much greater too. And now the nice thing about this was it allowed us to see 2 pockets of the institution from a different perspective. In one pocket, we had advisors picking up the analytics systems and using them and pursuing the promise that they provide with a lot of excitement and zeal. And in other pockets of the institution, we had advisors who were less engaged and less willing to take up this new work. And so the 2.34% gain was average, whereas the advising units that were the most zealous about using analytics saw gains as high as 7.77%, so 3 times higher than average. And in the units where we saw analytics not being used as rigorously, and we saw kind of flat, much lower, either no increase or in some cases some drops. And so this, for optimization, I mean, when you're trying to figure out what works or what doesn't work, this was kind of like a natural quasi-experimental situation that got set up where we had the results of some units where we saw these dramatic gains and the results of other units where we had seen no gains. And the key difference that we had seen was their intentional and collaborative use of analytics towards optimization. And so I think it's important to understand that we know that this kind of professional intentionality, the professionals who are able to act in an optimized and intentional way is where we see these student gains. Now we have a question from Erica Larson in the chat box. How did you determine if someone was using analytics rigorously or not? So the most basic form of that would be whether or not they were even logging into the systems. So we had trained everyone in terms of how to log in and how to use the systems effectively. And then it gives you a report of obviously who's logging in on a regular basis and who wasn't. Some of the units where we saw the biggest gains over the course of the semester, the median number of logins was 30 to the analytics system. And in other units, the median login to the system was 0, which I think tells you about this disparity that I was describing between the units that really took the analytics work seriously and those who took a pass on that analytics work. So overall, I think this is starting to pay off. Now, I want to give you another example, and we can move to the next slide about how analytics help you to be intentional. We have an impact analysis report that's provided to us by Civitas Learning. It's called Illum Impact. And you're able to put various co-curricular and extracurricular services, like attendance at those services, into this impact. And it does what's called a prediction-based propensity score match. It's a quasi-experimental design. And it produces out what's called a lift in persistence from term to term. So based on baseline, accounting for baseline variability, not just doing absolute comparisons of percentages, but looking at students who attended, for example, academic advising, and matched peers who were just as likely to be successful and just as likely to attend academic advising, which is this kind of propensity score match. And then looking at the actual persistence rates of those students term over term. And what we have seen is this kind of ability to increase our intentionality about where we're putting our resources. Now, all of the co-curricular services listed on the screen here, all of these are wins. And you might be saying to yourself, well, Obviously, a 5.59% lift is substantial, but there at the bottom, the Aggie Recreation Facilities, a 0.86% lift. Is that something, is that even worthwhile? Well, you have to understand that we're dealing with large numbers of participants, right? So in academic advising, in a semester, you might have 4,000, 6,000, 8,000 people participate in academic advising. And 5% of 4,000, if my math is right, is like 5% of 4,000 is 200 students. And so the reality is that 5% can end up changing the trajectory. And this is what this is, this impact. Impact evaluation is an estimated causal impact evaluation tool. We're estimating the causal impact using quasi-experimental methods. And so academic advising was changing the trajectory of 200 students each semester who would otherwise have left the institution. The Aggie Rec facilities over 4 years have served 32,000 people. So 0.86 of 32,000 is just shy of 320, right? So maybe it's 280 people. And 280 people is a lot of people. It's a lot of tuition dollars. So when these are all successes. All of the ones listed here on our screen are successes. And it's these different ways of evaluating these programs and seeing that, yes, we actually do know what works for students and what doesn't work as well. And now we can kind of put our eggs in the right basket. There's a question from Kate Avery that says, what does expanded orientation refer to? Previously at Utah State, we just had in-person orientation during the summer. And now we work with a company called Advantage Design Group to do 2 online orientations before the in-person event and 2 after it, even into the first semester that a student is here. And we call this, just-in-time information, right? So students are learning about parking in the middle of fall semester or right at the start of fall semester rather than learning about it in June when they're high school seniors and they don't care. So that's what expanded orientation refers to. So this is one of the ways that we're being a little bit more intentional. There's a question about timing of academic advising mattering in terms of student success. The timing does matter. I don't think we have time to get into it, but we have some reports that you can reach out to, and I'm going to show you some resources at the end. One other thing I want to speak to is talking about closing equity gaps. And so in the next slide, you can see academic advising closing equity gaps. So this is success quartiles kind of is built out around the idea of our prediction models predicting student success. So the top quartile is the students who are most likely to be successful, and the bottom are those students who are least likely to be successful. And you can see for the dark blue bars, these are students who have participated in academic advising, and the light blue bars are students who haven't participated in academic advising. You can see at the top, there's less than a 1% difference, non-significant difference in the persistence rates of people who attend advising and their matched, propensity score matched peers that don't. So again, this is accounting for baseline variability, right? These are fair comparison groups. As you move to the third quartile, you see a 4% difference, and then the second quartile, you see a 10% difference, and in the bottom quartile, there's a 13% difference. And what this means is that our work doesn't impact all students in the same way. But interesting, what we have found, and you could probably guess this, is who are we spending most of our time with? At Utah State, we spend most of our time with the top quartile students, and the next most time with the third quartile, and then the second, and with the least amount of time with bottom quartile students. Well, we've been working to switch that around, and we've seen over the last 2 years significant gains in the second and bottom quartile, where not only were we not serving them as much, but now that we are, we see this transformational elasticity, right? That's what these widening percentages shown on the screen means, that when you meet with a student in the bottom quartile, your ability to transform their life is 13% higher or 13 times greater than if you're meeting with a student in the top quartile. And that's pretty exciting, because what it means is that as we meet with more and more of these bottom and second quartile students, our persistence rates are only likely to go up. So that's one of the ways that you can use analytics to be intentional and optimize and close equity gaps. On the next slide, we'll see another example. We have a Gear Up program, and the whole point of Gear Up is to help low-income, first-generation, minority, and disabled students, high school students, middle and high school students, to prepare to be on the trajectory of being in higher education. There's a lot of different activities that they can do. There's like over 28. And so when we met with Europe to do this analysis, we started by saying, can we group these 28 different activities into kind of more overarching kind of categories? And you can see those across the bottom. We came up with 8. And then we were able to do what's called a latent profile analysis to see how participation or number of hours spent in each of these activities co-varied meaningfully with matriculation into the university. And what you can see is that these 4 bars each represent a latent profile, and the students in each of these profiles each have different matriculation rates into higher education. So the dark blue bar was the most likely to attend college. And you can see in that bar that it wasn't all of the services that were associated with their matriculation, right? College and career kind of readiness services, advising, family involvement, and kind of interpersonal components were the most successful in terms of having the greatest association for this group matriculating into college, whereas students in the light blue line were least likely to attend college, right? So they hadn't had these higher thresholds in those first 4 categories, but they had kind of a lot of interpersonal experiences and a lot of tutoring, right? And those things weren't kind of co-varying with matriculation to college. Yellow was kind of the average student. Most of our Gear Up students were on the yellow line. Kind of this was the most common experience or number of hours that students were participating in these different events. But you can see that you can use analytics pretty actively to start to figure out which of these services do we want to put our eggs in, which basket do we want to put our eggs in. And our advice to this Gear Up program was you really, to the extent that you can, you want to focus on that college and career, the advising, the family involvement, the interpersonal stuff, and maybe don't focus so much on some of these other things. Now, the next slide is some resources. We don't have time to go into everything, right? And so I want you to have these websites, some webinars, other webinars we've done, some different white papers, and that can help you dive deeper into some of what I'm talking about here. There is a question on the last slide, which is who was the gray line? They were another kind of middle of the road. They ran about the same in terms of likelihood to attend college as the yellow group. So that's a good question. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Rebecca Karoff, and then I'll be back for more questions at the end.
Thank you, Mitchell. That was great. A really innovative work there. I really appreciate getting a snapshot of it. So now we're gonna move to the example of a large system. And let me turn to David Troutman and basically pose the same question to you that I asked Mitchell. How is the UT system making data actionable, expanding data literacy among institutional stakeholders, and deploying analytics to better understand student behaviors, to design student success interventions and allocate resources? And if you too could speak to how the UT system is using analytics to understand and close equity gaps, that would be great.
Great, thank you so much, Rebecca. And thank you, Nash, for providing me the opportunity to share some of the work that we're doing at UT System. So just to take a step back before we jump into analytics, I just wanted to provide an overview of the UT system, the University of Texas system. We have 8 academic institutions and 6 health institutions. They range from UT Austin, which is our flagship, to UTEP, to UT Dallas, to more regional like UT Rio Grande Valley. And then we also have our health institutions, which range from Southwestern to MD Anderson. So there's a wide range of opportunities and experiences to work with data analytics. Each year we enroll about 240,000 students, both undergrad and grad. We enroll about 1/3 of all students in public academic institutions in Texas higher education systems. And in each year we produce over 50,000 degrees. So we're really trying to reshape sort of the creating an educated workforce for the state of Texas. Can you go ahead and just click to the next slide? And so really what is the mission of my office, and what's the vision I have for this office? So our mission is really to transform data into timely and meaningful information to support the UT system initiatives and policy decisions, and to enhance insight, transparency, and accountability. And really the vision that I have for our office is we strive to really create meaningful information and data to benefit students, faculty, and administration, to conduct research that is really informative and can be applied. to the missions of UT System and the missions of the UT System institutions. And then we create and promote data-related initiatives that enhance UT System decision points and stakeholder engagement. We maintain an environment that respects all data and ensures its security, reliability, and validity. And we really try to set the standard and try to strive to become a great higher education system that, that can analyze research and provide business intelligence solutions for our campuses. Go ahead and click the next slide. And so with my experience as a UT System, I've been at UT System for about 7 years now. And what I've concluded really is every campus is in its own space when it comes to data. And I think you probably feel the same way. And what I mean by space is I think about data maturity, where we have sort of our flagship, who's probably the most mature of gathering data and analyzing data in a way that can be proactively used. And then we have other campuses that I work with that we struggle and have conversations about how we define first generation, how we define Pell when it comes to Pell or Pell Ever, just different, sort of the foundational pieces to springboard off of. And so what I try to do when I interact with each of the campuses, and what I'll talk about today is 3 examples of what I've done for 3 different campuses, really showing the range of analysis approaches. So first, what's happening? So what can we report out? How can we analyze it? So why did it happen? How can we monitor it? So what is happening now using dashboards? And then how can we predict it? So what might happen? So probability of success, and then how can we simulate this? What will likely happen? So if we create sort of some model scenarios of how we can use that. So I'll provide some examples of what we've done using this framework. Go ahead and click the next slide. And then making data actionable. Rebecca Karoff knows this. I say this almost every day, is I want to create actionable information. I don't want to live in an ivory tower. I don't want to live in a think tank that doesn't go anywhere. My goal in my career is to make sure that we have a positive impact on students' lives. And so with that, there are different ways that we apply these data. One of the most simplest tasks is just descriptive statistics. So we're exploring higher education data. And really the applications associated with it, just that exploration, is data governance, data literacy, dashboards, and data cleaning. So for example, I've been working with a campus for the last couple of years, and we've really tried to create a sense of community as it relates to data. So when I meet with them once a month, I have someone from their registrar's office, someone from their admissions office, someone from their financial aid office, someone from their provost's office. So we're all together at the same table, and we've built a language that we're all speaking together, rather than one speaking Spanish, one speaking English, one speaking French, and one speaking Russian. And I think that's done wonders to really understand how we can create dashboards that would be informative. And I think the other thing that I didn't mention is that when creating actionable data, you need a project charter. You need a focus area. Otherwise, you might be chasing your tail. So if we focus in and hone in on one particular area, it will help you have a deep dive versus trying to tackle everything. And if there's a product out there that says, oh, we have an easy button for that, I would question that. There is no easy button. I always argue that if it was easy, someone would have already created created the solution to the problem that we're facing. And then the next task that I'll briefly talk about is predicting a discrete attribute. Using logistic regression, decision trees, survival analysis, things of that nature to predict matriculation. So we admit so many people. We know there's a percentage of yield. How can we anticipate the types of students that will be accepting our letters and showing up on our campuses? And how can we anticipate their needs, meet them where they're at? And then how can we predict retention and how that's playing a role as well? And then predicting continuous attributes. So using multiple regression, using machine learning. So that's something we've been doing for the last couple of years, is taking into account both traditional statistical techniques, but also machine learning and leveraging that to really truly understand. I think there's a fine balance between doing both. You do not want machines making your decision for you. You do need to bring a human element to this to really try to interpret what's happening, and then the fusion of qualitative research as well to truly understand what's happening. But how can we use that? We can use it to predict future GPAs. We can use it for student success index. And so someone asked what factors are included in the student index. So for that, we're not going to jump into that one for this discussion, but just to highlight what we've done is we've created, using high school level data and student information, think of it as sort of a student credit score before they even step foot on our campus, so we can start anticipating the needs that they might have. And I'll talk about sort of what we've done with the next step, which is finding common groups using cluster analysis. I think people are so eager to predict something, but let's reflect on what we know already and using historical data to understand what types of groups that are out there that might be leaving us, and how can we optimize interventions to make sure that we're meeting those students' needs. So go ahead and click the next slide. So then what I've done is I've sort of taken snapshots of some of the things that we're doing for the campuses. So the first thing that I wanted to do is show that we're developing these internal dashboards for individuals to use to truly understand certain outcomes. And so this is called the cohort flow chart. And what it does is it just simply shows the flow chart of a certain incoming cohort. If you can see at the top, you can have different slicers. You can slice it by gender. You can slice it by Pell Ever status. You can slice it by ethnicity, and you can also slice it by entering status, whether that be first time in college or transfer students. And then by doing so, you can start looking at the pipeline and flow of what's happening from fall to spring, spring to fall, fall to spring, and just go forth and understand. And what we've done is I'm always a big support of using multiple different types of data sets. It's not just focusing on what data we have, but also National Student Clearinghouse data, earnings data, anything that might tell the complete story of what's happening with students. And with this is just simply showing first time in college students for everyone, and it's showing merging in National Student Clearinghouse. We can see who's enrolled, and then the next phase is who's not enrolled, who's enrolled outside our UT system, are they enrolled somewhere else, and their continuing enrollment. So you start getting to slice and dice it in a way that provides very informative information. And the other thing is, to the right side, you can see entering major and you can see last major. So you can start seeing where they fell out, where they left. Was it from engineering? Was it from the arts? Was it from a variety of different areas? And so you start pinpointing and selecting that information. So you can use this for historical data, like I said, for looking at longer term outcomes, looking at 4 or 6 year graduation rates, but you can also look at it for more intermediate terms of short term of first year, second year, third year retention. And so then you can start building and figuring out those populations that you could potentially pilot different services for. Go ahead and click the next slide. So Rebecca mentioned about equity gaps. There's another area where we've created dashboards and graduation rates and retention rates. This is the graduation model. So keep in mind that we do everything in Power BI because I really believe that it's sort of an easier tool to use. I'm not endorsing their use, but I'm just saying that that's what we use. And so this is one of probably 8 different views of retention, graduation, migration, a variety of different things that they were looking for. And what I mean by they, this is the institution where I meet once a month, and there's a variety of different stakeholders. So we've infused not only enrollment data, but also financial aid data to truly understand those who are Pell. So as you can see with this graphic, it's showing you 4-year and 6-year graduation rates for a certain cohort, which you can change that year. You can change the FTIC as well to transfer if you needed to. And what it does is it provides you sort of the placeholders of 4-year graduation. So the first one, the bar, is the number of students within a category. So this is non-Pell ever other races. And then there's non-Pell ever white female, non-Pell ever other races male. So you're starting to sort of slice the data in a way that you could truly understand what types of programs or how big your program might be for certain populations. And what you can see here is So the fourth bar is going to be Pell Ever Other Female. And so they seem like they have the highest 6-year graduation rates for this institution at 64%, versus the third bar that is much lower. And so it's really trying to figure out, how can you take this to scale? How can student success champions on the campus have conversations with deans and department heads for certain majors? Because this chart is also interactive. So if you're interested in pre-nursing, what's happening to pre-nursing for these certain populations? Also, this is an internal dashboard only, because you can get down to small cell sizes. So the goal is to always be FERPA compliant and making sure that we're not disclosing information of students, but it's helpful for department heads and others to have access to this so they can make actionable information based on their findings of student success. Go ahead and click the next. The next thing that we're doing for several of our campuses is creating a matriculation dashboard. So I came up with this idea several years ago, probably, oh my gosh, 10 years ago, where we can start thinking about how to strategically use financial aid dollars so that we can increase the likelihood of someone matriculating into the 12th class day, so our census day, of those who were admitted as early as January of that year, earlier that year. And so with this is really trying to create this actionable information so that we can figure out what types of students are accepting and coming in, and what types of monies it would take to increase their likelihood to do this. This is all fake data. The algorithm behind it is real. You can interact. So the green columns actually are the interactive tools where you can increase or decrease the amount of loan, work study, and grant scholarship and tuition waiver associated with the student. And that provides information on whether or not that's going to impact their likelihood of showing up, which is the bar that's yellow. With that, there are some students that and what we do is we follow up and use National Clearinghouse to figure out where they're going. And then there's some certain students that go Ivy. They've been given a full package to a private institution. There's no competing that. So we need to acknowledge that and figure out how we can use those dollars elsewhere if we need to. But I think the other thing that's exciting about this effort is not only do we have this yellow bar of probability of matriculation using logistic regression, we can also indicate other student success indicators so that we can start anticipating their needs before they set foot on the floor. So all these analyses are based on admits. So we've admitted these students. Each institution has a yield rate. It ranges from 38% to I think 52% yield. And so how can we anticipate who's going to show up and what needs they might need based on something that Rebecca Karoff and I always talk about, which is the 3 pillars of belonging, finances, and advising. And so how can we also educate our services that are currently out there at our campuses to let them know this student's going to show up. They have a 90% matriculation rate. So we know we're going to receive that student. How can we build an infrastructure or a safety net for these students so that they have the resources they need, even though we might know that they are less likely to succeed. But we want them to succeed, so let's give them the resources they need. Go ahead and click the next slide. And then the last thing was something that I think is always important. Sorry for the little typo. It moved around, so it's a little off-kiltered. Just doing some simple cluster analysis. And what we've done with that is we've took each of the institutions' data and we ran it through National Clearinghouse to see if individuals were retained or not retained, and also using some of their demographic and their enrollment information to identify clusters. And then those are focusing on, like I mentioned before, the belonging aspect, the financial aspect, and the advising aspect. And so what we've done is sort of created these sort of categories of, are students in financial risk? If they're not in financial risk, are they also academically at risk? If they're not academically risk, so it's sort of triangulation or trying to cluster them in groups so that it's more manageable for intervention, such as financial literacy. If we're predicting that there's a financial risk associated with the student, maybe it's most likely important to have some type of financial literacy training, or with Rebecca Karoff's movement towards sort of open education resources, figuring out the emergency aid programs that could be beneficial, and our early alert system, a peer tutoring, things of that nature. And maybe they're at risk for, maybe it's not a financial risk, but maybe it's an academic risk. And how can we create more comprehensive or wraparound life learning communities, or outreach and engagement, diversity and global learning, just the undergraduate research experience, using all these data that we have to our advantage. And so I think the key here is to make sure that you have someone that's a champion on your campus to make these data come to life. I can create you I always say this to the campuses, I can create you a beautiful dashboard, but if no one uses it, it's just a beautiful dashboard that just sits there in space. So it needs to come to life. It needs to make sense. And so someone's asked, let's see here, what kind of statistical patches are you using, and what product do you use to create dashboards? So we use Microsoft Power BI. And so I think that has been a nice product to use. It's very easy to learn. It's very easy to teach, and it's very transportable based on our system level contracts across the universities gaining access to that information. For our statistical packages, we use R, we use SAS. I'm a firm believer in having multiple tools in your toolkit and not to just isolate on one area. Being creative with how you use that. I've used RapidMiner before for machine learning. It depends on what kind of access you do have. Keeping in mind, I think machine learning is going to be coming up more and more in the future, and it's currently right now. But I think you have to be very careful on how you use it, because sometimes a simple mistake of a coding error can create the wrong translations and findings. And that's really where the data literacy comes into play, so that we're all speaking the same language. And then the other thing is to make sure that you have, you acknowledge the historical data that you do have. So we're very fortunate system that I have a data set of 1.4 million UT students that completed or not completed. And so it's very powerful. But we also have to acknowledge the limitations that exist based on the historical data, and are we truly capturing the true phenomena that are currently happening with our current students? So I will pause there, and I think Rebecca is going to ask some follow-up questions.
Yes, thank you, David. Lots of food for thought for both Mitchell and David. But if we can go to the next slide, we want to at this point kind of open up the discussion, and we have two sort of big questions on the next two slides. And just to bring us back to think about the broader context of taking student success to scale, the work we are all doing as part of that initiative, and just to think about maybe some of the cautions around analytics. David did just say clearly, and I think Mitchell was also really strong in that way about needing to be very intentional. But how do we keep students front and center in the analytic endeavor to ensure that they don't become data points? I mean, it really is extraordinary that, a student can be an amalgamation of 800 different data characteristics, but they are instead really very complex people with a range of identities, assets, experiences, behaviors, needs, goals. So in terms of predictive analytics, which has this exceptional capacity to understand students and provide that really fine-grained, precise, personalized understanding, we have to really be careful about not dehumanizing them. And we can't let data be destiny, especially for low-income and students of color, those who are historically minoritized or labeled as un- and underprepared. So I wanted to ask Mitchell and David, but I also am mindful that we have about 15 minutes left, and we want to make sure we have time for everyone's other kinds of questions. But how do we address this and ensure that we bring, really this is about bringing an equity lens to this work. And when we think about the primacy of data in our everyday lives, you know, cell phone usage being probably the most predominant way we all expose ourselves constantly, how do we really make sure within our institutional enterprises that data isn't destiny? And I'll throw it to, yeah, Mitchell and maybe David, and then some others might weigh in.
I can say one of the things that that we have really been intentional about is involving students in the process. So we recently released what's called the Student Insights Report, which is available on one of those resource pages that I linked to. And we call it an analytics lookbook, and it highlights 20 insights that we've learned over the last 3 years about what helps students be successful. We wrote it to a wide variety of audiences, but the primary audience, primary stakeholder, is the students themselves. And so I've spent the last maybe 3-4 months going around and talking to student groups where I can get invited in about the insights that we have, why we're using their data, how we're using their data, and then asking them, putting it back on them to tell us how they feel about that. What are their thoughts? I think partly because the book helps them to see that what we're doing is positive and has a good gain for the effort on their behalf. Their response has been overwhelmingly positive. There hasn't been any negative response to the analytics or any of this Big Brother kind of stuff. On the more than 400 students we visited with, they have all said, "Wow, this is amazing. What else could we do? What other data points could you collect?" You know, they're very envisioned towards this idea that data can be a useful tool when we're not weaponizing it and when we are having a thoughtful conversation and being mindful to be cautious about issues of equity and whatnot. We're also bringing in students of color as advisors in the work to make sure that we're talking about their perspectives, using their data in a way that actually makes sense to them as readers so that they see themselves reflected in the words on the page.
That's incredible.
So Rebecca, so from my perspective, I think we always have to be careful that so as a statistician, I can isolate a variable and I can tell you the likelihood of someone or some variable that's the likelihood of success, right? But as humans, we're not isolated. There's no mutually exclusive categories of a low-income student. So we're multidimensional. So we have to always put that in some context. I think also my goal is to never disclose potential success rates to students. That's not the point. The point is to inform our administrators, because I have a belief that if we admit someone to a university, we have admitted them. We have made a commitment to them. So we need to meet that commitment by creating resources that will help them be successful. And so I would never disclose any information for that student to see that. Because honestly, I'm a first generation student. I didn't do well in the SAT. I would probably be predicted to fail at our flagship. But then, you know, I pursued and I got a PhD. So I beat the system. But I think that's where it goes back to also qualitative data. So based off all this historical data of creating algorithms and predictions, it's based on historical data. So our campuses have changed dramatically over the several years. So I want to make sure that we capture this qualitative piece of capturing the student voice of what's happening to our current students so that it can resonate and validate or invalidate what we're finding with our models.
Thank you. And, you know, I'll invite people on the webinar to maybe type in some of the ways how they're addressing this issue and using, really ensuring that we bring an equity lens to the work. But maybe we can move to the next slide and ask another big question. And again, I'll invite people to start typing and chatting away so we can see how you're all thinking about it. In developing this webinar, we've described analytics as pivot points in collective impact models that bring leadership, administrators, faculty, and advisors together to not only solve problems around retention and completion, but also to measure and advance student success more holistically and more equitably. So I wanted to give Mitchell and David a chance to say what you find probably most innovative, productive, and exciting for what you're doing in this work. And maybe identify a couple of your biggest challenges. And again, I'll invite participants in the webinar to type away into the chat box. It'd be great to capture a record of some of the ways you're using and thinking about this. But if you also have very particular questions for David or Mitchell, this is also your time to type into the chat box. So we'll start with Mitchell again. Thanks.
So I think one of the things that emerged pretty quickly in our regression models and in the random forest that we did was that the variables that predict student success most effectively or most consistently always come back to the student's experience with the faculty in the classroom. We have all these add-on services, co-curricular, extracurricular, and we spend a lot of money and time and blood and treasure on these add-on programs, you know, athletics and football games and dances and tutoring and all these things. But what our data consistently shows is that students' experiences with faculty in the disciplines is our best source of retention. When a student feels lit up and excited about their major, about the classes that they're attending, about the faculty research opportunities that they're participating in, faculty mentoring, they stay enrolled. And when they're engaged, they stick around. Now, it also presents the biggest challenge because the levers that we have for optimizing the faculty space in the classroom are limited by the heritage of higher education, which has upheld faculty members as the paramount position in the university. And so there's a lot of ossification that has happened in terms of faculty's willingness to maybe try new things or develop their teaching in ways that aligns with what we're seeing working. You know, if we see a pocket of faculty being really effective in their teaching, and then we go and expect everyone else to be as effective, that's not gonna, you know, you can't say jump and have, you know, 800 faculty jump. And so, while we see the value of the classroom experience as being the most potent force for good at the institution, it may be the least nimble to influence and modify and optimize. And so that is an exciting, you know, challenge to have, but it also is a big mountain to climb. So it's something that we're looking forward to kind of expanding our ability to support faculty where they're at and optimize the kind of classroom offerings. But it is going to be a pretty heavy lift.
David, what about you?
So I think I was trying to, thank you for giving me the time to think about it. I think one of the most exciting things that I've experienced thus far, because before I was at a system, I was at the flagship for several years. And I was just recently at a campus for a day trip, and I was meeting with them about analytics. And I think one of the most exciting things that has resulted in our work is that we're all throwing out the same metric and rates of success. I think one challenge that you can face at different levels or different universities is you come together, convene, and everybody says, well, I have this metric, I have this metric, I have this metric, and we're circling each other but not having a productive conversation. And so I think by having these dashboards, having common definitions, having a mutual understanding of what we're trying to achieve has created an energy on campus to truly look at student success. And I think that's been exciting. I think it's also exciting to really show that some of the products of the Student Success Index that we've created has already been implemented on our campuses to truly understand how we can create specialized experiences and meeting them where they're at. So I think those are the two things that come to mind.
We have a nice comment from Manar Sabri that she uses analytics, or he, sorry, excuse me, uses analytics to identify students at risk, but doesn't label them. I think that's a really important point. What about other questions that people have who are participating? Any kind of question at this point? Or any kind of response to the two last prompts we had? Well, I don't know. This might be one of the webinars where we end a few minutes early. There we go. from Stephen Lindberger. When it comes to supporting students that take courses 100% online, what factors do you use to measure student success?
Really?
And if others, anyone should weigh into this, if David and Mitchell don't have ready answers.
So I can say that we like to use persistence from term to term as a proxy variable for all kinds of student well-being because it's so easy to measure, so consistent, and our models built around it are really, really strong. And so we kind of look at persistence as kind of a catch-all proxy variable for student well-being. To that end, when we race variables in random forests and or regressions to try to figure out which, and really both, to try to figure out which variables are most predicting success in an online environment, we tend to see categorically different variables from those that we would see in brick and mortar classrooms or broadcasted classrooms. Some that matter most in our online models are individuals' age, right? So if they're aging out of the technology, so to speak, we see problems with that. Them logging into the LMS, pretty consistently using the LMS the way that their peers are. We see a reduction in the use of the LMS as being a problem with online students. And so there are some variables that kind of pop up that are pretty obvious that if you're going to be successful in an online environment, the technology is going to be one of the core vehicles through which you manifest that success. And if you're not engaging with that very effectively, then that can be a problem.
We have another fantastic question from Julie Hartley. What interventions can happen at the system level as opposed to the institutional level? Now that would be worth a whole interactive discussion, Julie, but I don't know if Mitchell or David want to weigh in on this or some others in the webinar, because I think to me, this is partly a question that speaks to if you're in a system, the systemness you have, the kind of accountability framework you have in place for your institutions, and the extent to which you sort of do things at the system level versus just help collaborate, enable institutions to work through some of this on their own. But it's a great question. I don't know if others have some thoughts in our
Well, from my perspective, I agree with Rebecca. It depends on sort of your systemness, but I think one thing that we've found beneficial, especially with Rebecca Karoff's work, is convening individuals together to share best practices and share also practices that don't work or haven't worked for them, so that it can help an individual campus think about, well, I'm thinking about this intervention. Well, another campus says, we tried that, and this is why it failed. So it helps them anticipate potential, minimize the risk associated with what types of programs you're putting forth. So it's more collaborative in a way.
I echo what David just said. Julie, asking the question, happens to be in the Utah system of higher education, so I know her well, and here's my chance to kind of tell what I think. And the answer is, yeah, that collaboration. I do think that some of the principles of organizational psychology that we have been successful with work whether they're at the institutional level or the system level, right? Supporting people where they're at, giving people a lot of autonomy, relying on their funds of knowledge, having open conversations, as we have been doing here in Utah. And so I think it's a great question, and I think some of the answer, at least, is that some of what's going on is the same, whether it's at the institution or the system level.
Well, I think that's a good way to maybe close this out in part. There we go. We have Rosemary Haggett from UNT, one of our Texas colleagues. It also depends on how different your system institutions are in terms of size, student body, portfolio programs. We also have had success with convenings at the system level on strands we share. I think that's great. I will say that I'm just struck by how much we're all drowning in extraordinary data. And I want to thank David and Mitchell for providing these really great, very pithy case studies in a way, examples, models of how to do it collaboratively, how to do it with intention, how to do it with students at the center and equity mindedness coursing throughout the programs that they're running. So I think we'll need to end it there. I don't know if Rebecca Martin wants to come in and close us out, but I want to thank everyone for participating. This was a rich discussion. I especially like some of the questions at the end that I know NASH members will have other opportunities to think about and discuss together.
Great, thank you all. And I hope that all of you, you know, we can't do a round of applause on a webinar, but if we could, these three would certainly deserve one. They've provided some great concrete examples of how to use data to advance student success efforts and to do it in very thoughtful and creative ways. So we're indebted to all of you. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for joining us for another NASH webinar. We're glad to have so much interest. Have a good day.
Thank you.